Girl reveals location of missing millionaire's son, but when they get there, everyone is shocked by what they discover. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The echo of knocking on the mansion's front door reverberated through the empty hallways like an omen. The widowed millionaire startled in his leather armchair, nearly spilling the glass of scotch he held in trembling hands. For 6 months, ever since his world collapsed, no one had dared disturb him in his fortress of pain and isolation. His slow footsteps echoed across the cold marble as he made his way to the entrance. The fortune accumulated over the years through savvy investments on Wall Street had provided him with everything except the one thing that truly mattered, the ability to protect the one he loved most. His net worth in dollars seemed insignificant compared to the emptiness consuming his chest. When he opened the heavy, carved wooden door, his eyes met a sight that made him recoil instinctively. A scrawny girl, looking so frail that her 4 years seemed like only 2, stood on the threshold. Her torn and dirty clothes contrasted brutally with the luxury surrounding her. Her disheveled hair framed a thin face, but it was her eyes that hit him like a punch to the gut, large, bright, and filled with a strange determination for someone so small. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse and drink. The girl looked up at the mansion's ceiling, her little eyes following the architectural lines with a disconcerting precision. When she finally looked back at him, her words came out in a whisper that chilled his blood. "Your son is up there." The world stopped. The air became thick, unbreathable. The millionaire felt his legs weaken as he processed those 4 words he had just heard. His mind, dulled by alcohol and constant pain, struggled to understand what was happening. You're lying," he murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. "My son, The girl kept her gaze fixed on him, unblinking. There was something in her expression that transcended her age, an unwavering certainty that made him question his own sanity. "He cries at night," she continued, pointing discreetly upwards. "I hear him." The man's heart raced. During all these months of nightmares and guilt, he had sworn he heard phantom voices in the house. The doctors had said it was normal, grief manifesting itself through auditory hallucinations. But what if... Where? The word came out as a desperate roar. "Where did you hear him?" The girl took a step back, startled by the intensity of his reaction, but she didn't run. Her courage was impressive for someone so small and visibly vulnerable. "Up there, when it rained really hard, I hid here in the garden. I heard a child crying." The millionaire looked at his own hands, trembling uncontrollably. 6 months. 6 months of desperate searches, sleepless nights, guilt consuming him like acid. The police had given up after 2 months. The community volunteers stopped searching after 3. Only he had continued, searching every corner of the property, every bush in the garden, every room in the house. Except the attic, he whispered, the words coming out like a terrible revelation. The girl nodded gravely, as if she knew exactly what he was thinking. The mansion's attic was a space he rarely visited, accessible only by a retractable ladder in the second-floor hallway. In recent years, it had become a repository for old objects and memories he preferred not to revisit. But there was something else, a secret passage that his own father had built decades ago, connecting the boy's room to the attic through a disguised opening in the wall. "No, it's not possible," he murmured, running his hands over his face. "We searched everywhere. The police, the firefighters, everyone searched." But even as he spoke, a disturbing memory began to form in his mind. The elderly housekeeper, who had worked for the family for over 20 years, had acted strangely in the weeks following the disappearance. Nervous, evasive, always carrying extra trays of food upstairs, claiming to be organizing the empty rooms. "The lady of the house," said the girl suddenly, as if she could read his thoughts. "She goes up there every day. She takes food." The millionaire's blood ran cold. The housekeeper. The woman who had raised generations of his family, who knew every secret of the mansion, every hidden passage. The only person who had remained in the house after he dismissed almost all the staff in his despair for isolation. "Where is she now?" he asked, his voice barely a thread. "She left this morning. She always leaves on Friday." Friday, the day the housekeeper did the weekly grocery shopping. The only time the house was truly empty, except for him locked in his study, drowning the memories in scotch. The millionaire looked at the beggar girl, this strange child who had appeared out of nowhere with a revelation that could shatter or completely rebuild his reality. She remained there, patient, as if she understood the magnitude of what she had just revealed. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. The girl lowered her eyes, playing nervously with the hem of her torn shirt. "Because I know what it's like to be lost and have no one come looking." Those simple words struck the millionaire's heart like a direct hit. This abandoned child, fighting for survival on the streets, had found the compassion needed to save another lost child, while he, with all his wealth and resources, had failed to protect his own son. With trembling legs, he began to walk towards the internal staircase, the girl following silently behind him. Each step felt like an eternity, each heartbeat echoed like a war drum in his ears. Reaching the second floor, he stopped in front of the retractable attic ladder. His hand trembled on the pull cord, fear and hope waging a devastating battle in his chest. What if it was true? What if his son was up there, just yards away, during all these months of agony? But what if it was just the cruel delusion of a street child? The girl gently touched his hand, her eyes full of an understanding that defied her age. "He's waiting for you," she whispered. With a sharp movement, the millionaire pulled the ladder down and began to climb, each step taking him closer to a truth that would change everything forever. The attic was plunged into a gloom that smelled of old wood and accumulated dust. The millionaire groped along the wall until he found the switch, and when the dim light came on, what he saw left him completely bewildered. The space that should have been abandoned showed clear signs of recent occupancy. A makeshift mattress in one corner, plates with food scraps, a half-empty glass of water. His eyes scanned every inch of the room as his heart hammered in his chest. There, on the wooden walls, were small drawings made in pencil, childish figures that he immediately recognized as his son's characteristic style. Cars, airplanes, stick figures that the boy used to draw in every corner of the house. "Where?" he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Where is he?" The girl pointed to a wall that looked solid. But when the millionaire approached, he noticed a disguised opening, the secret passage that connected the boy's room to the attic. His hands trembled as he touched the wood that appeared to have been removed and replaced several times. "Something's blocking it on the other side," said the girl, pressing her ear against the wall. "But I hear breathing." The sound of rubble being moved echoed as he forced the passage. Pieces of plaster and wood had collapsed, creating a barrier that completely blocked the exit. But there was a small opening at the top, large enough to pass food and water. "My God," murmured the millionaire, the reality of the situation finally hitting him with full force. A faint sound came from the other side of the wall, a soft, almost inaudible cry. The millionaire pressed his ear to the opening, and his soul shattered as he recognized that voice that had haunted his nightmares for 6 months. "Daddy," the small, frightened voice echoed through the wood. "Is that you, Daddy?" Tears began to stream down the man's face as he struggled to find words. "Yes, my son, it's Daddy. I'm going to get you out of there right now." "I'm scared, Daddy. The lady said you were very angry with me for hiding." The millionaire's mind processed those words with growing horror. The housekeeper had found the boy, but instead of alerting them to the rescue, she had kept it a secret. Why? During all these months of despair, while he consumed himself with guilt and scotch, his son was there, just yards away, I'm not angry, my love. I've never been angry with you. We'll talk about everything when you get out of there, okay? The work of removing the rubble was arduous and desperate. Each piece of wood the millionaire removed revealed more disturbing details of the situation. There was evidence that someone had been minimally caring for the boy. Clean blankets, improvised toys made from materials found in the house, even some children's books. When he finally managed to open a sufficient passage, what he saw left him devastated. His son was too thin, pale, with the large, frightened eyes of someone who had lived months in captivity. But he was alive. He was breathing. He was there. The boy threw himself into his arms, trembling like a leaf. "Daddy, I couldn't get out. I tried so hard, but the stones fell and I got trapped. The lady said you didn't want to see me anymore because I was disobedient." The millionaire's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. As he held his son against his chest, his mind swirled with devastating questions. Why had the housekeeper done this? Why had she lied to a 4-year-old child, making him believe that his own father had abandoned him? The beggar girl watched the scene from the other side of the attic, her large eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to perfectly understand the pain of that reunion. She had grown up without a family. She knew intimately the suffering of abandonment. "We need to get out of here," said the millionaire, carrying his son in his arms. The boy was lighter than he should have been, clearly malnourished, despite the basic care he had received. Going down the stairs, he settled his son on the living room sofa, covering him with blankets and offering him water. The child drank desperately, like someone who had been deprived of adequate care for a long time. "Daddy, why did the lady say you didn't want me anymore?" asked the boy, his small voice filled with confusion and hurt. Before he could answer, the sound of the key in the lock echoed through the house. The housekeeper had returned from her weekly shopping trip. The familiar footsteps approached the living room, and when the elderly woman appeared in the doorway, her face paled instantly at the sight before her. The shopping bag slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor. Her eyes moved quickly between the millionaire, the boy on the sofa, and the beggar girl who was watching everything from the corner of the room. "How?" was all she could whisper. "Why?" The millionaire's voice came out as a controlled roar. "Why did you do this to him and to me?" The housekeeper leaned against the doorframe, her legs clearly failing. Tears began to stream down her wrinkled face as she looked at the boy she had cared for in secret for so many months. I found him on the second day of searching," she began, her voice trembling. "He was desperate, screaming for help through the passage. When I managed to get him out of there, the ceiling had partially collapsed. He was hurt, scared. And why didn't you tell me?" The question came out laden with all the accumulated pain of 6 months. "Because it was my fault," she blurted out, sobbing. "I knew about that secret passage. I should have warned you about the danger. I should have checked better when he disappeared. I thought that if you knew I had been negligent, you would fire me. And who would take care of him then?" The millionaire looked at the woman who had been like a second mother to him, who had dedicated more than 20 years of her life to that family. The distorted logic of her decision began to make painful sense. The fear of unemployment, the guilt, the genuine concern for the child's well-being. "But why did you lie to him? Why did you say I didn't want him anymore?" The housekeeper lowered her head, shame consuming her. "Because he was crying for you constantly. He asked why you weren't coming to get him. I thought it would be easier for him if he believed you were angry, that it was a temporary punishment. I never imagined it would take so long to what? To confess." The millionaire's voice was filled with a mixture of anger and despair. "To have courage," she completed, collapsing into a chair. Every day that passed made it harder to tell the truth. How to explain weeks of silence? How to justify months of lies? The boy watched the conversation without fully understanding the complexity of the situation, but perceiving the tension in the air. His eyes moved between his father and the housekeeper, trying to process information that his 4-year-old mind couldn't organize. The beggar girl silently approached the sofa and sat down next to the boy, offering him a gentle smile. There was an instant connection between the two children. Both had known abandonment, albeit in different ways. "What's going to happen now?" asked the boy, his voice still weak. The millionaire looked at his son, then at the housekeeper who had cared for him for decades, and finally at the girl who had made that reunion possible. His fortune, built through careful applications and strategic investments on Wall Street, had never felt so insignificant in the face of the emotional complexity he faced. "Now we're going to take care of you," he said finally, kissing his son's forehead. "And we're going to figure out how to heal all the wounds that this situation has caused." But even as he spoke, the millionaire knew that recovery would be a long and painful process for everyone involved. Trust had been shattered, psychological trauma had taken root, and devastating secrets had been revealed. Night fell over the mansion as the family doctor finished examining the boy, confirming that despite malnutrition and emotional trauma, he was physically stable. But the professional's eyes revealed concern about the child's psychological state. While the boy finally slept in his own bed for the first time in 6 months, the millionaire remained awake, wrestling with decisions that would change the lives of everyone in the house forever. The days that followed the reunion were an emotional roller coaster that tested the limits of everyone in the mansion. The boy, after months confined in a small, dark space, developed a severe phobia of open spaces. Whenever he left the room, he panicked, trembling uncontrollably and asking to return to his safe hideaway. The millionaire hired the best psychologist money could buy, but the results were slow and discouraging. Dr. Ramirez, the specialist in childhood trauma, had warned that recovery would be an arduous and unpredictable process. He associated the confined space with safety for months, the psychologist explained during one of the sessions. For him, the outside world represents danger and abandonment. This is going to take a long time to reverse. The beggar girl, who had remained in the house since the revelation, had become a constant companion for the boy. She was the only presence that calmed him completely. She understood fear viscerally, having lived years on the streets where every shadow could represent a threat. "She has nowhere to go," the millionaire said to the housekeeper one morning, watching the two children playing together in the room. "And he needs her." The housekeeper, who had been forgiven but carried a devastating guilt, nodded silently. Her hair had turned even whiter in recent weeks, and she seemed to have aged years in a matter of days. The weight of her decision consumed her like a disease. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "I need to tell you something else about those months." The millionaire turned, a familiar sensation of dread settling in his stomach. "He asked about you constantly, especially in the first few weeks. He cried so much that I feared he would get really sick." Her voice trembled. "So I started telling him stories about you traveling for work, taking care of important business deals. I said you would come back when he was a good boy." "What stories?" The question came out as a whisper. "That you were investing money overseas, expanding the family fortune. That you needed to stay away to protect our assets." She paused, the tears flowing freely. "I thought it would be easier for him to accept a temporary absence than the truth about my negligence." The millionaire closed his eyes, feeling the weight of yet another layer of trauma that his son had faced. Not only the physical confinement, but also the psychological manipulation that had distorted his perception of reality. He believed he had been abandoned because he wasn't good enough, continued the housekeeper. "I started creating little tests for him, saying that if he was obedient and didn't make noise, you would come back faster." The revelation hit the millionaire like a punch to the gut. His mind processed the full horror of the situation. A 4-year-old child, already traumatized by confinement, had been conditioned to believe that he deserved abandonment. That night, after weeks of minimal progress, the first of the episodes that would change everything happened. The boy woke up screaming in the middle of the night, not just with nightmares, but with hallucinations. He saw the walls of the room closing in on him, heard voices saying he had been a bad boy and that he would be punished again. The millionaire ran to the room, finding his son huddled in the corner, trembling and repeating, "I'll be good, Daddy. Please don't leave me again. I'll be good." "You've always been good," said the father, trying to hold the boy who was struggling in panic. "You've never done anything wrong." But the words didn't reach the child. Months of psychological conditioning had created scars too deep to be healed only with love and patience. The beggar girl appeared in the doorway of the room, awakened by the screams. Without hesitation, she approached and began to sing a soft song that she had learned on the streets, a melody that other abandoned children used to calm themselves on cold nights. Miraculously, the boy began to calm down. His breathing stabilized and the tremors gradually decreased. "How did you do that?" asked the millionaire, amazed. "On the streets, you learn to recognize fear," she replied simply, "and you learn that sometimes words don't help, just the presence." It was from that night that the millionaire began to realize that the girl was not just a casual witness to his son's suffering, she was an integral part of his recovery. There was a connection between them that transcended normal circumstances. But the challenges were just beginning. The boy developed obsessive behaviors, constantly checking if the doors were open, if there were escape routes available. He hid food under the bed, fearing that he would again be deprived of adequate food. "It's normal," explained Dr. Ramirez during a particularly difficult session. "He's trying to regain control over his environment. These behaviors are defense mechanisms." But what definitively broke the millionaire's heart was discovering that his son had lost the ability to trust him completely. The child obeyed everything without questioning, as if any disagreement could result in abandonment again. "He doesn't act like a normal child anymore," confessed the father to the psychologist. "He acts like a traumatized adult in a child's body." The situation with the housekeeper became unsustainable. Although she demonstrated genuine remorse and continued to take care of the house with dedication, her presence was a constant reminder of the trauma. The boy shrank whenever she approached, and she herself couldn't look at him without being consumed by guilt. "Maybe it's better if I leave," she suggested one morning, after another episode in which the boy hid upon seeing her. "No," said the millionaire, surprising himself. "Running away won't solve anything. You both need to find a way to heal this wound together." But the complications continued to multiply. The beggar girl, despite being a calming presence for the boy, brought her own traumas. She woke up in the middle of the night looking for food, couldn't adapt to the idea of having her own room, and showed clear signs of anxiety whenever unknown adults visited the house. "She also needs professional help," observed Dr. Ramirez after meeting her. "But it's clear that the two children help each other in a way that we don't yet fully understand." The millionaire found himself divided between multiple complex emotional responsibilities. His son needed intensive, specialized care. The beggar girl needed stability and therapy. The housekeeper needed forgiveness and renewed purpose. And he himself needed to deal with 6 months of trauma, guilt, and the devastating discovery that he had failed to protect the one he loved most. His financial investments continued to generate profits automatically, but for the first time in his life, the millionaire realized that all his wealth was useless in the face of the complexity of the emotional problems he faced. There was no amount of dollars that could buy instant healing for such deep traumas. It was during a particularly intense session with Dr. Ramirez that the most painful truth came to light. The boy, finally managing to verbalize some of his feelings, revealed that during the months of captivity, he had prayed every night that his father would find him. "But the lady said you were too busy making money to think about me," said the child, his large eyes fixed on his father. "So I stopped praying and started thinking that if I was very, very good, maybe one day you would remember me." The silence that followed was deafening. The millionaire felt as if a part of his soul had been torn away with those innocent words. His son had spent months believing that he had been abandoned for money, that his value as a person was secondary to his father's business deals and investments. "That was never true," he said, his voice broken. "You have always been the most important thing in the world to me. Always." But the words, however sincere, seemed inadequate in the face of the magnitude of the psychological damage that had been caused. That night, when he finally managed to put both children to sleep, the millionaire locked himself in his study and cried like he hadn't cried since his wife's funeral. The house, with all its grandeur and luxury, felt like an emotional prison where everyone was a victim of circumstances that had completely spun out of control. Outside his window, the city slept peacefully, unaware of the devastating drama that unfolded within that mansion, where money had proven completely powerless against human suffering. 3 months after the reunion, a seemingly simple moment would change everything forever. The millionaire was in his study reviewing investments when he heard something he hadn't heard in almost a year. The sound of genuine childish laughter echoing through the hallways of the mansion. Running towards the sound, he found a scene that made his heart warm for the first time in months. His son and the beggar girl were in the garden, playing hide-and-seek, but in a completely different way. Instead of hiding in fear, they were running freely through the open space, shouting with joy when they found each other. "Daddy!" shouted the boy upon seeing him, running towards him without hesitation. "Look how fast I run now." It was the first time since the rescue that his son had shown pleasure in being outdoors, the first time he had run voluntarily into his father's arms without signs of anxiety or fear. Dr. Ramirez, who had arrived for a routine session, observed the scene with professional surprise. "This is an extraordinary breakthrough," he murmured. "They are healing each other in a way that traditional therapy would take years to achieve." But it was during that same session that an unexpected revelation emerged. The beggar girl, finally comfortable enough to talk about her past, told a story that left everyone in the room in silent shock. "My mom used to work in a big house like this," she said, playing nervously with her fingers. "She cleaned and cooked for a wealthy family. But she got sick and couldn't work anymore." The millionaire felt a strange sensation in his stomach. "What was that house like? Do you remember?" "It had a big tree in the garden and a staircase that went down to the garage. My mom always said that the boss was very good, but she was ashamed to ask for help when she got sick." The pieces began to fit together in the millionaire's mind, like a devastating puzzle. 5 years ago, he had had an employee who worked for a few months before simply disappearing. A young woman, always kind, who had mentioned having a little daughter. She had asked for medical leave a few times, but had never fully explained her situation. "What was your mother's name?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Elena," replied the girl. "Elena Martinez." The world stopped. The millionaire remembered clearly now. Elena had been one of the most dedicated employees he had ever had, but had disappeared abruptly when her health situation worsened. He had assumed that she had found another job, never bothering to find out what had really happened. She's not here anymore, is she?" he asked gently. The girl shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "The doctors said she went to heaven 2 years ago. Since then, I've lived on the streets." The silence that followed was filled with a guilt different from the one the millionaire already carried. While he was building his fortune through investments in stocks and financial instruments, one of his former employees had struggled against a terminal illness, and her daughter had been left completely helpless. "Why didn't you ever mention this before?" asked Dr. Ramirez, his professional voice masking his own surprise. "Because I thought he wouldn't remember my mom," replied the girl simply, "and because I didn't want him to help me just out of pity." That revelation created a new dynamic in the house. The millionaire realized that fate had brought this child to him in a way that transcended coincidence. Elena's daughter had not only saved his son, she had been sent by a chain of events that connected their pasts in an inexplicable way. "She belongs to this family as much as any of us," he declared that night, looking at the housekeeper who had watched the entire revelation in silence. But the real transformation began when the millionaire made a decision that shocked everyone, including himself. He decided to liquidate a significant portion of his investments, instruments that generated millions in annual dividends, to create a fund dedicated entirely to the well-being of children in situations similar to those that his son and the girl had faced. "Sir," protested his financial advisor during a tense meeting, "this will represent a significant loss of net worth. Your gold holdings and your investments in crypto are at peak profitability." "And what good was all that wealth when my son was suffering yards away?" replied the millionaire. "What's the point of accumulating capital if I can't protect the one who matters most?" The decision was not only financial, it was deeply personal. He had spent years focused on multiplying his fortune, on diversifying investments, on maximizing profits. But all this obsession with financial security had created an emotional distance that almost cost him everything that really mattered. The housekeeper, witnessing this transformation, found courage to make her own final confession. During a night when the children slept peacefully, she revealed the last secret that tormented her. "There were moments," she said, the tears flowing freely, "when the boy begged me to tell you where he was, especially in the first few weeks. He even tried to shout through the passage, hoping you would hear him." The millionaire closed his eyes, feeling a fresh wave of pain. "But I had created such an elaborate story about you traveling for business, so focused on your international investments, that he started to believe that he really wasn't a priority for you." She paused, struggling with the words. "And when he stopped shouting, when he stopped asking for you, I knew I had broken something inside him." "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because you deserve to know the whole truth. And because he's healing, despite everything I did. You both are healing." And it was true. In the weeks that followed the revelation about Elena, both children showed extraordinary progress. The boy had stopped having regular nightmares and began to show genuine curiosity about the world around him. The girl had accepted having her own room and began to trust that she would have food and security every day. But it was during a special afternoon, exactly 1 year after the initial disappearance, that the real miracle happened. The millionaire was in the garden with the 2 children when his son did something he thought he would never see again. He ran spontaneously to the place where there was a small passage between the plants, a natural hideout, and shouted joyfully, "Daddy! Come play hide and seek with me. But this time it's pretend, and you have to find me really fast." It was the first time that the child had transformed a trauma into a healthy game, the first time that he had regained narrative control over his own experience. Dr. Ramirez, present to witness this moment, smiled for the first time in months. "This is genuine healing," he said. "He not only overcame the trauma, he transformed it into something positive." 6 months later, the mansion had become a true home again. The 2 children had developed a deep friendship that functioned as continuous mutual therapy. The housekeeper had found a new purpose, dedicating herself to ensuring that both children felt loved and safe every day. And the millionaire had discovered something that no investment had taught him. That true wealth was not in accumulating assets, but in cultivating genuine relationships and in using his resources to create emotional security for those he loved. "Daddy," said his son one sunny morning, "don't you travel anymore to make money?" "I don't need to travel for that anymore," he replied, smiling. "I discovered that the most important wealth was already here at home." The girl, now officially adopted by the family, smiled that special way she reserved for moments of pure happiness. "And now," Are we a real family? We always were, said the millionaire, hugging both children. It just took me a while to realize it. The house, which had been the scene of so much suffering, now echoed with sounds of genuine life, laughter, conversations, soft music that soothes quiet nights. The money that had once been an obsession became simply a tool to create security and opportunities for those he loved. And on quiet nights, when the children slept peacefully in their rooms, the millionaire sometimes looked at the ceiling and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not only for having recovered his son, but for having discovered that life had given him much more than he had ever dared to dream. A real family, built not only by blood, but by love, forgiveness, and the courage to heal together the wounds that life had caused.